program today is the future of the mobile app store, and it's a timely program. Currently there are more than 400,000 mobile apps, and I think that's probably on the low side. The panelists might agree with me. Do we have any mobile app developers in the audience? Quite a number. I thought I'd start off by giving some statistics. I checked the statistics. It's hard to find current statistics because some of these based on studies that took time some time ago. But one study found that mobile app downloads would climb from 7 billion this year to 50 billion by 2012, in 2 years. That same study also found that the mobile app market, which this year is over $5 billion, will grow to $17.5 billion in 2012. So that's good news for the developers. 1 in 4 adults in the United States currently are active users of mobile apps. App users have an average of 27 apps on their phones. Anybody have more than 27 apps on their phones? Well, the average by this study, maybe this study is old, they have 27 apps. What I wanted to do, we have 4 great panelists, and what I wanted to do is ask each panelist to introduce himself and tell you a little about his company and what he does with mobile apps. And I think it's just an interesting panel to hear what people are doing. So our first panelist to talk is Paul Nolting, who's Senior Counsel at Verizon Wireless. Paul, you want to give a little bit of an introduction of who you are and what Verizon does and what you do?
Hi. Is there anyone in the room who doesn't know what Verizon does? We can sort of cut to the chase here. Verizon Wireless is obviously the largest carrier in the industry currently. And in many respects, I'm going to be a little salesy here and say, I think we're doing some of the most interesting things in the industry. In particular, there was a significant announcement just in the last couple of days. We had a very successful developers conference in Las Vegas. And announced a whole set of tools and resources for developers. So I think the most important thing that I'd like to do tonight is invite everyone who is interested in application development to look at our developer portal, if you haven't already. It's developer.verizon.com. And see what's there, including, as I say, a whole slew of new things that that have just been announced within the last couple of days. My role at Verizon Wireless is I'm an attorney with the Verizon Wireless legal department, and I oversee legal issues related to the developer portal. If you do visit the site and you get red-eyed looking at fine print and pop-up screens, you can partly thank me. But seriously, the work that I do really cuts across a whole range of issues that affect the wireless industry, privacy issues, export control. There's an interesting issue that is under discussion with the FDA about when does a health-related application make or does a health-related application make a wireless phone a medical device for Food and Drug regulatory purposes? So there's a whole range of surprising and interesting issues in this area, and it's really quite quite an honor for me to have the opportunity to work with people at Verizon Wireless and with people people like yourselves who are really inventing something completely new in terms of how people interact with each other and with information using mobile applications. So.
Thank you, Paul. Michael Bramlage, our next panelist, is Director of Product Management at the OVI store at Nokia. Michael?
So I'll start a bit like Paul. Does anyone not know who Nokia is? Maybe not in the US, you never know. So I am a Director of Product Management for OVI store. I'll give some feedback to our brand guys to ensure people know it's OVI and not OVI. But if anyone wants to know what it's like to build and run an application store, I think I'm your guy for that. So basically my team is about 10 technical product managers that are responsible for concepting, planning, designing, writing feature specifications, building roadmaps, doing UX documentation for really the multi-sided market that we run with the OVI store at Nokia. So my team does the consumer experience, so across .com website, .mobi website, and of course a mobile client experience, right? So, if any of you guys want to know how you develop it, I can help with that. My team also does the end that Paul was referring to regarding developers and publishers. So my team is responsible for the ingestion system, basically the process by which we register developers, we collect their information, they can upload items to the store, they assign metadata to it, they merchandise it, they pick price points, they pick countries, blah, 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 they see reports. My team also does that as well. And then perhaps the most important part, because Richard, you'd mentioned there's about, 400,000 applications. The big challenge is, how do you connect those 400,000 applications with the right user at the right time? So the third part of my team is really tasked with that. They're trying to figure out how you efficiently take the right piece of content from your catalog and show it to the right user at the right time. So everything from search to CMS tool sets to recommendation systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My team basically designs and helps develop those. I realized too I skipped an important point. I don't know if I clarified what OVI Store actually is. So OVI Store is Nokia's mobile application and game storefront. It's available on our full range of devices, so we work for mobile phones that are Series 40 phones. That's our platform at the mobile phone level. For smartphones, we work on Symbian 3.x, 5.x, and the newly released Symbian 3 set of smartphones coming out in a few weeks. And we also develop a consumer storefront experience for our new sort of top-of-the-line mobile platform called Migo, which we do in joint partnership with Intel. And just to plug a little bit too, like Paul did, so we had a developer conference a week ago in London called Nokia World, and a lot of exciting announcements came out of that. Happy to share too that we're averaging about 2 million downloads a day. So, in terms of numbers, we're not insignificant.
And I think you told me you have 15,000 apps so far?
Yep. But we like to, I think that number's a little bit skewed if you just base kind of your catalog on the pure volume of applications. I don't think that cuts to the heart of like the health of your ecosystem or actually your offering, right? Because you can have a lot of apps, but if they're not locally relevant, then what's the point?
Thank you.
Yep.
Jaspreet Singh is the New York mobile lead at Sapient. Jaspreet?
So I'm not sure how many people know Sapient. I was told today in the office that Sapient, having been founded in Boston in the early 90s, at one point employed about 25% of its workforce from MIT graduates. So it was an interesting proof point as far as our relationship over the years. I work for a division within Sapient Corporation called Sapient Nitro. Sapient's broken up into three different divisions. The first is Sapient Global Markets, which is our trading and risk management business, servicing primarily the financial markets and commodities markets. Sapient Government Services, which is relatively self-explanatory by the title, and then Sapient Nitro, which essentially is our integrated marketing and technology solutions business. What does that mean? I've been working on this explanation for a while because I think it's taken a little bit of massaging over the last few months internally as far as positioning into the marketplace. But Sapient's roots really are as a technology consulting company. And from the early 90s into the early 2000s, what we were doing within our business was helping businesses harness the power of technology for their own businesses, increasing efficiency, increasing optimization of business processes, and so on and so forth. And I think that, the late 90s was a product of there's technology, and how is that going to impact the way that our business operates? So that's phase one. And then we fast forward to 2007 and 2008 through today. And what's happening in the marketplace is consumers are adopting consumer-facing technology in brand new ways, and it's being led by, to some degree, a lot of the mobile, the evolution of the mobile market. And not only is it mobile, but it's the adoption of social media and these trends that are taking place that are impacting the way consumers interact with technology, and ultimately how consumers interact with brands. And so what organizations and brands are really worried about, or the leaders of those organizations are up at night thinking about, well, how do we reposition our business to relate to and interact with consumers using the tools that they use today? So it's no longer about business optimization. It's about how do you optimize your relationship with the consumer, and through what devices and what mediums is that consumer actually using today, and how can I leverage that? So Sapient Nitro is a division within Sapient Corporation that partners with brands to allow them to develop strategy to help them understand how to do this, but then also implement. So not only do we bring strategy folks like myself who have a specific discipline in mobile or social media or a host of other subject matter areas, but we bring creative resources, we bring technology development resources to the table to really help organizations and brands and partner with them to take strategy and really bring it to life to help brands interact with their consumers in a more effective way. My role at Sapient is mobile strategy lead for New York City, or the New York region, I should say. So I've partnered in the New York region with many FS firms. Prior to Sapient, I worked at Citibank and helped develop Citibank's retail mobile strategy and managed all the mobile products that are kind of evolving into what you see today from Citibank in the space. And prior to that was working for about 6 years in the mobile space with a technology company, a small technology company innovating in SMS text messaging. This was circa 2001. But we partner with companies, and they come to us with questions around, hey, I am a global financial services company with a specific niche in X, and I want to leverage the mobile space, but I don't know how. Do I build an app? Do I build a mobile website? Do I have some sort of text messaging application to provide to my consumers or customer base? Here are the objectives that I'm trying to achieve. How do we build a strategy around that, and then ultimately how do we implement it? That's primarily my focus within Sapient. And I think a forum like this is fantastic because I think whether it be developers or folks who are in marketing or leading organizations and trying to really understand what the change in consumer behavior today and the way that consumers actually interact with technology impacts their business. It's top of mind for every industry vertical that I can think of. Prior to 2007, the only people who were doing anything in mobile were the entertainment and media companies, and perhaps the carriers and other folks within the mobile marketplace themselves to try to create adoption or drive adoption. Now that adoption has happened, businesses are really trying to understand how to leverage that. So that's kind of the perspective I bring to the panel today.
Thank you, Jaspreet. And the next speaker is Stefan Gramal, President of Technology for .go.
Yes, I'm filling in for Patrick McCowan, who's our CEO, who had a last minute problem. So, of the panelists, I probably am newest to mobile. I actually was an astrophysicist before I co-founded .go 5 years ago. So, I have a probably slightly different perspective. So, .go is really a mobile publishing framework for with an emphasis on text messaging. So in a way, it allows anybody with the website to create essentially to customize their website for text messaging and create, in a way, apps for text messaging. And there are two major distinctions in .go versus the other ways that exist today to build SMS applications. The first is through our use of shortcodes. So most of you probably know what a shortcode is. You see these on TV and on advertisements. They're these special 5 or 6 digit phone numbers which are required for any kind of text messaging campaigns, for sending out alerts or for allowing people to contact your business or your organization by text message. So one of the issues with shortcodes today is that they're very hard to brand. So because they're 5 or 6 digits long, somebody can be out, they can see on a sign, text WIN to 12345, and then 10 minutes later, it's very hard to associate what that 12345 was, what brand that was. So there's no way to kind of search for shortcodes, find shortcodes, or make that association. The second problem is really one of publishing, that there are a lot of siloed solutions out there right now for creating text messaging services, but they're not always developer friendly, they're not very standard, and in many cases they're kind of limited. So we at .go developed the first markup language for text messaging called CMRL. And the neat thing about that is that it lets anybody with a website create, again, essentially a mobile app for text messaging in the same way they would create a website, right? On a website, you essentially use HTML to author and publish content. With .go, you can author and publish your content using CMRL. And that allows for a very rich and sophisticated integration with the existing tools and content management systems and things like that. So our vision really is to take text messaging, which, as everyone knows, is the very ubiquitous and the only universal mobile publishing medium, and to bring it to every single website out there in a way that really makes sense to both the end user and the publisher. So I guess my perspective on a lot of kind of the app stuff is really being approached from SMS and from making sure that when you publish content, it's available to everybody with a cell phone, rather than having a very limited audience that you're reaching.
Right. So let me ask the first question. Paul, I'll direct this to you, and the other panelists can comment on it if they have any comments. What is the difference between mobile apps and other apps, desktop or what have you? Why are mobile apps different? Why are they such a big phenomenon?
Okay, I'm gonna start with a disclaimer, which is I'm a lawyer and not a technologist. So there are probably people in the room who could explain this better than I will. But obviously the devices have gotten tremendously more capable and sophisticated in the last couple of years, and in particular smartphones like the iPhone as the pioneer, and more recently the Android devices have really changed the way users use mobile networks. The other thing, and I'll mention this again from the, since I'm coming from the perspective of a carrier, is the networks have gotten a lot better, and they're going to get much better very soon. Verizon is on the verge of launching its LTE network, which will offer much higher speeds over the air, and so reduced latency and just a whole range of network capabilities that will be significantly better than 3G networks, which are already significantly better than what we were all used to even just 2 or 3 years ago. So the devices and the networks they're connected to are much more capable. And then in terms of the sort of the social aspect of this, mobile applications I think are fundamentally different than other kinds of computing devices, computing applications, because people interact with them constantly. There are 3 things that most people these days don't leave the house without. You don't leave the house without your keys. You don't leave the house without your wallet, and you don't leave the house without your cell phone. So the user experience of how they, people are very dependent on their mobile devices and very attached to them, and I think that has implications for app developers, that sort of go beyond the engineering issues, as compelling as the engineering developments are. The penetration in the U.S. market is now over 90%, and the next frontier for the carriers is connected devices, so that when you'll hear the carriers all talking about penetration rates that exceed 100%, so that eventually the average user, right now, what was the statistic, Richard? 27 apps,
Right.
So eventually you'll have 27 connected devices. Your refrigerator will talk to the network. So all of those things have implications for app developers, because the whole environment that you're working in is developing very rapidly, and the growth of usage and the sort of psychic attachment of users to usage is increasing.
I guess I would just add to that. I think for me it's three things. See, I had the benefit of preparing my answer as you spoke. So, but I think it's three things. I think first is just the hardware, right? Like, these things have eyes and ears, right? I mean, your PC or your Mac at home, not everyone comes with a microphone, right? Or speakers, or a camera, right? Or an accelerometer, or GPS. This thing literally has almost all 5 senses associated with it. And the things that you can do with mobile applications to take advantage of those hardware capabilities is pretty incredible. I don't think we've even scratched the surface as to what an application can do when you've got speakers, a microphone, a camera, an accelerometer, GPS, and probably 10 other capabilities I'm not even thinking of right now. So the sheer form factor of it and the hardware involved offers a whole new set of possibilities that you can't normally get on a Mac or a PC. I think the second thing is the data, and I think this goes to what Paul was saying about sort of the fact that you never leave home without one of these devices. Is this device knows more about you than most anything else out there. You can really mine what's on the phone for interesting patterns, interesting things about the user, and if it's done obviously in a privacy protected way, there are a lot of interesting things that can get built on top of that. And I think the third is kind of like the use case, right? No one's ever always on with their PC or their Mac or even their tablet, but this thing is always on 24 hours a day, within arm's length probably at all times. And if you're an app developer or mobile game developer, you have to kind of readjust your use case a little bit, right? If you're building a mobile game, you can't build a game like a Halo. This isn't kind of a sit-back experience where it takes you 30 minutes to complete a level. You have to build a game like an Angry Birds that is more instant, more short, more sort of instantly gratifying. And you kind of have to pack your magic moments into 60-second to 90-second bursts as someone waits in line or waits for a train. So I think those three things, just like the level of data that's captured on these devices, the use case, just when you use it, it's obviously different than when you use other applications, and just the capabilities of the device itself and what can be done is sort of it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think I come back to the user, and Paul and Michael have mentioned the user a number of times in their response. We spent some time at Sapient trying to think through, from a user experience perspective, two kind of categories of consideration. The first being, what are the emotional tenets that a user may be engaged in with every type of platform that's out there, and the three platforms that we considered were PC, tablet, and mobile. And then what are the task or user modes that users are engaged in across those various platforms? And they vary differently and greatly across all three. And I think the uniqueness around an app that's built for a notebook or a desktop experience versus a tablet experience versus a truly mobile device that sits in your pocket and goes with you everywhere. Combining all the things that each device does, certainly provides app developers and brands opportunities to really leverage those things. But, it's really also about engaging the consumer with the right emotional-based app as well as task-based app, given the point in which they're using that device. And so, that's why I think in the app development world for mobile, whether you're developing for the iPhone or Android application or OS, and trying to understand, well, what do I do with my app if I really want to target a tablet-based experience as well? Those apps that simply do the same thing on a tablet that are available on a mobile device don't do very well because they don't leverage or take into consideration what the user is actually doing or feeling in every one of those cases. So I think bringing that the customer experience angle is almost as important as the capabilities of the devices themselves, because ultimately the user is the one who's going to either adopt or not adopt whatever app that you may develop for them. So the power is really ultimately in their hands.
Yeah, and to expand on that a little bit, I think one of the main differences between apps, let's say on desktop, and mobile is really the challenge in creating something that's simple to use and tailored to the user who's maybe banging away with their two thumbs or something, right? So you build a website or a web app for a desktop, and pretty much you slap together a website and people are going to be able to navigate around. They're sitting in front of their computer. They have a mouse and a keyboard. They can search very easily on the web page. You do the same thing on an iPhone, maybe web-enabled browser or in an app, and the user may just be lost, right? They're sitting there on the train, banging away with their thumbs, and as a result, don't get a good user experience. So I think, for me, a big part of it is just the challenge of really distilling down the part of your content, let's say on your website, that you want to convey to the user, and then really thinking about how the user's approaching that content so that you can display it in the most optimal way and give the user the best kind of user experience.
If I can add something to that, maybe coming at this from the opposite angle, we've all talked about how capable the devices and the networks are. It's also important for developers to remember the constraints that the environment that an app is used in imposes. The devices are better and better, but they do have some significant constraints, a major one being power management. So everybody plays around with the settings on their smartphone as to how quickly the screen dims, for example, because the screen dims because you have to save power, because the only power you have is what's in the battery. So how your app interacts with those things that are happening on the device. If your very exciting user experience in a game, as Michael was talking about, happens at the exact moment that the screen dims because the power management feature dimmed the screen, then that's going to impact how the user experiences your game. The other thing that I think there's a tendency to forget is it's a phone. So the game or the very intense experience with whatever information the user is interacting with can be interrupted by a phone call. It can be It can be occurring while the user is, walking down the street. As a lawyer, I will say hopefully it never occurs when the user is driving, but that's actually an issue developers need to think about. We see, I see lots and lots of user documentation about applications that, that starts with the, it's sort of the app version of don't try this at home, right? Don't use this app while you're driving. You have to remember, with a mobile app, your user is not sitting comfortably at their desk or uncomfortably at their desk using your application with an unlimited power supply coming through, an AC wire.
That's actually a good question. If a user is using an app while he or she is driving and gets into an accident, is the developer liable for that? So next question is, and this is a question that should be of interest to all the app developers. Michael, I'm going to ask you this question first. How should an app be priced? Should it be free with an upsell? Should there be a premium, a one-time download, subscription, service plan? I mean, how should it be priced? How do people make money on apps?
I think that's a great question. I think the real sort of meta point there is what should be the business model behind an application, rather than just saying, like, how do we optimize for the right price on like an sort of a la carte pay-per-download business model. And I think the real answer is it's an evolution. I don't think any developer that sets out, when they say what their business model is, I don't think that they probably stick to that 12 months later or 18 months later, or probably even shorter than that. But the cycles for business model evolution is even shorter than 12 months. So I think the key thing is an evolution, right? And you should experiment. You should try things like utilizing in-application purchase, right, to allow for, I guess, the optimization of both downloads, as well as you can do an upsell within the application into a revenue stream. There's obviously also business models around advertising, right, where you can actually integrate ads within your application. And then there's burgeoning sort of affiliate models where you can use your application to help discover other applications. So I think the answer is there isn't really one silver bullet. I think as long as an app developer goes into the process, with full understanding of the fact that it will evolve, that they will iterate, that they'll likely try different things, that likely any sort of business model or price point isn't universally transferable to all app stores or to all markets, then I think that's a winning approach.
Anybody else on the pricing model?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add to that, and I read a statistic recently that, and this varies across different app stores, but, today roughly 70 to 80% of the apps that are available to the marketplace today are in fact free. Now, some of those are provided and offered to the market by independent application developers, and some other cases they're offered by brands directly. If it's a brand-based application, that's either an extension of some servicing functionality that a large customer-oriented brand may be publishing to the market. In the case of Citibank, it was a mobile banking application, and we made the decision 4 years ago not to charge people for that. I think the question really comes down to what is the objective of the application. Is the objective of the app to generate revenue? And in a lot of cases, it may very well be. And in some cases, for brands specifically who are trying to publish apps to the marketplace, it's an extension of some other part of their business. And from a competitive standpoint, there may be pressures to publish apps so that they remain competitive in the marketplace. And in other cases, it may be a new revenue opportunity for them to explore. I think that a perfect example is what the publishing industry is going through today. There are certainly models that have evolved on the internet through the standard browser-based experience on a PC, where content is available for free in some cases, and in some cases there are paid subscription models that are in place for publications to get deeper content on the internet. But is the question that a lot of publishers are asking today is is there a premium to be paid to offer our content on a more mobile device? And if so, what is the business model there? What is the propensity for a user to actually pay for that? Is there value in the user's eyes to pay for content on mobile where they perhaps may not be paying for it on other platforms or other devices? So I agree. I mean, I think Michael has a great point in that it's a very situational kind of exercise. It's going to be a different set of considerations depending upon, what brand you are, what type of application developer you are, and ultimately, what's driving your business and what the objective of publishing an app in the mobile space is.
And so I would add to that as mobile development becomes more kind of a commodity, as handset manufacturers and Apple develop better and better tools for creating apps, it's going to be easier and easier, and it already is very easy to create a knockoff app, basically. So if your app and your kind of idea, if your application is basically an idea with an implementation of it on a phone, it's going to be very easy for somebody to knock it off. So exploring other revenue sources other than just charging for the app download are more and more important. And again, really focusing on the user experience and out innovating in terms of that, I think is key.
Yeah, I would just mention that I think one of the really interesting developments in the next couple of years is going to be the growth of in-app advertising. Right now, I think one of the big complaints that developers have is the lack of any real analytics and ability to understand who's using the app and ad impressions and all of that, and those are coming. In fact, the developer conference that I mentioned, Verizon just announced its availability of its set of analytics for apps. So, and that's by no means the only development you're going to see there. So it's I think the up until now, I think there's been a real emphasis on, I think a lot of the apps that we see coming into the Verizon App Store are, sort of two flavors. There's a free version and a premium version, and you use the free version to induce people to buy the premium version and, pay for the one-time download. But I think the pricing models are going to get much more interesting and varied, and they're going to be supplemented by advertising revenues, and again in ways that it's it's almost difficult to predict how that's going to happen because of just the changes in the ecosystem and the changes in the platforms.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, just an interesting concept with so many apps out there and with so many app developers. Really, what is the model that's ultimately going to work? Jaspreet, I'm going to ask you the next question to kick things off. How do you make a decision on what platform to use? I mean, you're an app developer. There are a number of platforms out there. Obviously, there's one gorilla out there on the platforms, but there are other platforms as well. And if I'm an app developer, I might not want to go with the gorilla. So what are some of the options on picking a platform?
Yeah, well, I think this is the number one question that I get in any client meeting, both current and prospective clients. I deal more on the brand side of the business, so the questions I get asked are, we want to develop an e-commerce application for the iPhone. Is that the right decision, or should we target Android, or should we consider the OV store on the Symbian platform, or should we even consider Microsoft Windows Mobile 7? Like, what are the decision-making criteria that go into that? I think there's a degree of discipline that on a brand level is still required. It's like making any other business decision. what are the business objectives, number one. It's really four factors. Number one being, what are the business objectives? Number two, who's the target audience, and more specifically within that target audience, what types of devices are they using and how are they using them? If you have a target audience that's skewing a little bit older, who may not carry, or you have low penetration of smartphones, there's a different strategy in terms of what to develop in the mobile space for a target audience like that versus a tween audience who may be carrying a more messaging based device or a smartphone device for that matter. So knowing the target audience is number two. Number three, I think, is really trying to understand what are all the options out there. In the app space, you have the operating systems that I've mentioned, iOS, Android, Symbian, Windows Mobile, Blackberry, certainly a big one, and to a lesser degree Windows Mobile, or a lesser degree Palm as well. We'll see what HP does in that space over the next few months. But beyond the app space too, there's the question of, well, do I develop an app or do I develop a mobile website, or do I develop both? And what role does text messaging play in my mobile strategy? So knowing what the options are and then mapping those back to, okay, well, here is what I know about my target audience, here's what I know about how they use devices and what devices they specifically use, and then what are the business objectives that I'm trying to achieve in developing an app or a mobile website or an SMS-based application, and craft the strategy considering those options. And then finally number four is develop a roadmap against that. So what are the highest value pieces of functionality, services, offerings that I can develop based upon lowest level of complexity, highest impact, or highest value to the consumer, and really develop a rollout strategy based upon those things. So, I don't think that it's any different than making a decision about any other type of product that you want to take to market. But there are unique considerations. I don't mean to downplay the uniqueness of the mobile space and the implications of making those decisions. But if we think about iPhone or iOS development, the type of language or technical expertise that's involved in developing that type of an app versus an Android app, versus some of the other platforms out there, there's distinctions between the two, and there are costs associated with making the decision to go with one or to go with all. I think everyone in the room would love to say, well, we should develop an app for every platform to get the widest reach out there. That's not the wrong decision to make. It's just reaching that decision after really going through all of the various disciplined based approaches around considering all the options and considering target audiences and business objectives is really the approach that we at Sapient definitely promote. And I can't even tell you the number of times I've sat in a room and people or clients have said, well, we want to develop a Blackberry app or we want to develop an Android app. And certainly Sapient and others like us can do that. But the question that we ask back is, well, why? Like, how did you reach that decision? And is the decision a sound one? And I think that, the more we have conversations like that, where, instead of mobile solutions being generated and built based upon knee-jerk reactions of what's being published in the Wall Street Journal or other trade publications every day, it's really taking a more disciplined approach to say, okay, well, we know that we need to do something. Let's figure out the right way to do it, and who's the right partner. Can we do it internally or externally, and how do we really get it done, and against what timeline?
Any other comments on that question?
I just second the comment that it's not exclusively a what's the coolest technology decision. It's fundamentally it's a marketing decision. Who are you trying to reach? And so the sexy smartphones get a lot of the press, but if you looked at the mobile marketplace, I'll just throw out one example. Verizon Wireless has millions of brew phones, in market. So, Droid is a growing part of the business, but there's a huge part of the business in terms of embedded base that anyone who is only focused on how do I make a cool app for Android is going to miss. I think it's interesting to me, and I'm glad that we have someone on the panel who's coming at this from the the text messaging point of view, because I think that that probably is a very telling point on this issue. Every phone in use has the ability to send and receive text messaging, text messages, and there are certain kinds of things that's perfectly fine as a vehicle for reaching that mobile mobile user. If you're after a give an example of a health service that's trying to collect information to manage healthcare cases. You want to collect blood pressure readings from a large number of users to remind them that there's that tracking that on a daily basis is important to the management of hypertension, for example. A large number of the people, older people who you want to reach as your market, probably don't have an iPhone, and maybe that's a stereotype for the market. But this is fundamentally, this is marketing. Who's your customer? What kind of device do they have, and what's the best way to reach them?
Michael, I would assume you have some comments on that?
Well, I think it's really simple. I think if you're a developer, you should go where you think you can become rich and famous. I'm serious, though, but I mean, the homework behind figuring out where you can become rich and famous is actually very complex. You have to do your diligence, right? You have to look at, top line and bottom line. Like, where are you going to get the user that you're targeted? And most importantly, how are you going to convert, right? Like, one of the things that we do that we're quite proud of is we actually work with 91 operators around the world, and we offer up integrated operator billing, so that if you don't have a credit card, or if you want to just press 2 buttons, you can put a charge onto your operator account. So we're able to reach a large number of users that don't have credit cards, or users that prefer the convenience of putting the charge on the operator bill versus having to enter the credit card information and maintain the credit card information with that account. So conversion is extremely important. But do the math. It's a simple model. Pull out the Excel spreadsheet, put a model together, and understand who you can actually reach and how you can convert them. And then on the development side, look at the cost of development, look at the cost of signing, look at the cost of submitting your application, and most importantly, look at the cost of marketing, right? You have to worry about how are you actually going to sell this thing that you built? How are you going to get users? How are you going to stand out in the crowd? I think that there's this moment where kind of a lot of mobile app developers push and pray, or they publish and pray. They get their app in the store, and they cross their fingers that maybe they'll get a spike in popularity that will then get caught into one of these algorithms that will make them, top free or top paid, and that will sustain their business. But that's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. So anyway, it's like any business. It's just don't, do your homework, do the math, do the diligence, find out where you can become rich and famous. That's the key point.
Yeah, and just one quick thing to add to that, that Michael, you reminded me of, and that is, if you do kind of, push apps out there and pray that they are successful, there is actually an interesting social element built into app stores today around, what do users think of my app, and what are they going to publish and post in the app store about my app, right? So as an app developer, this is equally so for brands, but even for app developers, if you're out there publishing apps and you're constantly getting rated 1 star, for the apps that you publish out there because you haven't done the due diligence and haven't really put a whole lot of thought into, what the app does and across what platforms and all of that. There is a social element built into the way a lot of these app stores are managed today, where users are either propping up those best-selling apps or bringing them down, and a lot of clients that I speak with actually kind of forget that sometimes because they want to get something to market as quickly as possible. They want to cut corners and not put the highest quality or right functionality out there. And in the retail e-commerce space, product reviews make or break your product. And in a similar way, I think the same is true for apps.
And touching a little bit also on what Paul said, I think distribution is also an important consideration when you're choosing how to develop the app. So there are apps that you would download and use a lot, like a game, right? That makes a lot of sense. In a case of, let's say, a website that you visit once a year, Starbucks.com, I probably visit once a year, right? So it may not be worth my time to go download an app, have it sit on my phone when you're really only going to be using it infrequently. And so in that use case, something like SMS or mobile web makes a lot more sense. Whereas, I said, a game or something like that, where you're going to have a much more constant interaction with the user, you probably would want to have something that's more persistent on the device. So, and as another example of that too, in terms of use case, if I wanted right now to run a poll and say, I'd like everybody in the audience to give me their feedback by mobile, what could I do? I wouldn't really say, now download the iPhone app, because maybe you don't have an iPhone, right? I wouldn't say download the Android app, maybe you have an iPhone. So thinking about how your users are using the service also might push you in a direction of something more ubiquitous like mobile web or SMS.
Stefan, let me ask you a follow-up to that, because you brought up a question that I was thinking of asking, which is the whole distribution issue. So if I'm an app developer, how do I get access to a distribution channel? I mean, how do I get my app out there? Is it the App Store, the web? I have problem of a little opportunity to advertise. What do I do to get my app into the distribution channel?
Right. So I think one assumption, which was touched on just a minute ago, is if you just put your app out there and expect the app distribution to do your marketing work for you, that's probably not a good bet to do, right? You'll get a bump if you're in the top 3 or somehow promoted by the distribution channel, but really ultimately it comes down to how you're going to market your service, and then what you expect the user interaction to be, as I just talked about. So if it's a one-off kind of thing, enter to receive alerts or find something out about us, then having a lower barrier to entry, having something that's almost persistent like a website or an SMS site makes a lot of sense. Whereas if it is something that a user will interact with on a much more frequent basis, then having a downloadable app, I think makes a lot more sense in that case.
Anybody else on the best way to get the app out there into distribution?
I'll just make a comment to pick up on something Michael mentioned, and that is how is the user going to pay for your app may be a consideration, and you may want to take that into account in deciding which app stores to put your app in. The Verizon App Store offers carrier billing. That may be helpful because you're after users who don't have credit cards or PayPal accounts, for example. Those are considerations. But I think the real question is, for a lot of app developers, is going to become more and more, how do you leverage your app across distribution and across platforms so that you're not dependent on it being found in iTunes or Android Market, or something like that.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. And this is for Paul, since he's the only lawyer on the panel. What are the legal pitfalls for app developers? If I'm an app developer, what do I have to be careful about?
I would say probably the issue that I spend the most time on is privacy-related issues, and in a mobile environment where you have the potential to collect a lot of really interesting information about people, where location data, for example. If your app is going to use location data, privacy is a big issue for you. There are guidelines that CTIA publishes for location-based services, and when we look at location applications or applications that use the location features of the network or other location sensing capabilities coming through our review process, we're very attentive to how the developer is handling those issues. I mean, for example, a location application can't run in the background where so the user is not aware that it's on. The user has to be aware that they have to opt in affirmatively to have their location tracked, and then there are within the guidelines there are requirements for reminding the user periodically that their location is being tracked. So so privacy is a big issue. Another one that is probably a lot of people don't think about, but is covered pretty much by all of the app stores. If you look at their ingestion process, is export control. If your application uses encryption, the App Store operator is going to expect the developer to pay attention to export compliance requirements, and in some cases that's an easy issue, and in some cases it's not so easy. But read your iTunes developer agreement very carefully. For example, Apple's put that onus on you. The other one on sort of my top three, because I'm involved in discussions about it currently, is health-related applications, which raises a combination of privacy issues because of the sensitivity and significant regulation of health information, and the issue that I mentioned earlier of when does a medical-related app trigger FDA compliance requirements. That's an issue that again, read your app developer agreement. There's probably a section in there that says you're responsible for that, but if you're doing anything that's health related, you may have FDA oversight issues that that you'll have to look into. So.
Okay, let's take. Are there any questions? Yes.
So the question was regarding sort of App Store policies and approaches to alternate payment methods, specifically around Facebook credits and virtual currencies. So from my perspective, what I'll say is we're always out there looking at what's available, because our general philosophy is that consumers will migrate to the most convenient payment method for them, right? And so for us, we've made a pretty strong stand that while we do offer credit card billing, we also want to offer operator billing, because we feel that is the most convenient for the first-time user, as well as the user that's on their 50th session or 100th session, or download. So just in short, consumers will go. It's kind of like water, right? Water will go to the lowest spot. Consumers will go to the most convenient payment method available to them. So, when the numbers bring to bear that consumers actually want to pay with something like Facebook credits or some other virtual currency or scratch card model, then I think it's incumbent upon every app store to look at that and find out whether they need to support it, and perhaps most importantly, where, right? Because the one thing about OV Store being in 190 countries, we're probably in more countries than the UN actually recognizes. But the one thing that we have is this global perspective and this real recognition that every user is different, that unlike the Android market, not everyone wants to see their items in some foreign currency, right? So we're very dedicated to providing a local store experience that puts every price point in that user's local currency and that offers a method that's convenient for them.